So my name is Toby Muse. I'm a foreign correspondent, a documentary filmmaker, and now I am an author. I just published earlier this year my first book called Kilo, Inside the Deadliest Cocaine Cartels, which is a non-fiction account of the cocaine trade, mainly in South America, from the beginning, making the cocaine in the jungles and mountains of Colombia as it passes through the underworld and then is exported to the rest of the world. And I've been a foreign correspondent working in the wars in Syria, in Iraq, and I lived in Colombia for just over 15 years, and now I live in Washington, D.C.
Oh, you're in Washington. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I wasn't too sure where you were either. So no, that's interesting. So I suppose to start off, the first thing I want you to find out is how you ended up in Colombia initially. Did you go there with a view to write a book, or did that sort of happen along the way? I mean, you could talk me through that.
Yeah, so I moved to Colombia. I had backpacked when I took a year off between school and university, and I backpacked through Central America. And people spoke so highly of Colombia, but I didn't get a chance to go there. Then in university, during one of the summers, I spent 3 months in Colombia. This would have been in the late 90s. And I loved it so much, I wanted to get back as soon as possible. By the time I graduated from university, I now knew I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. And Colombia at that moment was everything for me about being a foreign correspondent was. It was this life of adventure, being in the jungles, the mountains, covering wars. And you couldn't have convinced me of any other job on the planet. You could have offered me astronaut, president, prime minister, CEO. No, none of it. I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. And so I arrived to Colombia, and then I just, I loved reporting on that story, on this phenomenal people, this beautiful country, that kind of trapped in this tragic circle. That a big part of it is to do with the cocaine industry. In terms of how the book came about, I kind of a facile answer that I've been given is that really I wrote the book in a year, but I spent 15 years researching it, because all of my time there in Colombia, I was accumulating the information. There's an interview in that book from 2009. There's another section that's from 2005. And so when you live in a country for so long, and I lived in Colombia for, as I say, just over 15 years, I left, it was time to move on. But you feel that you want to leave. It's strange. It was something I wasn't expecting, but you feel that you want to leave something behind that reflects that amount of time you've given of your life to that country. So either a book, a documentary, something substantial, something weighty. And so the idea of a book, and plus I felt like a lot of the cocaine industry hadn't been really written about. And so I saw that kind of space there to write the book I wanted to write.
No, that's fantastic, and I'm halfway through the book at the moment, and I'm really enjoying it. There's a lot of great stuff in there, and a lot of sad stories as well. So that was one of the things I wanted to ask. I mean, I've not got to the end yet, but I imagine there's a lot more sad stories and things in there as well. But I wanted to find out for you in the process of living there and writing the book and things like that, what story or what encounter do you think was the most affected you the most emotionally, if that makes sense?
Sure. I mean, it's all heartbreaking. There was a Venezuelan prostitute that I really thought, because I thought that was a really sad story, because somehow if you grow up in it, I don't know, because for her this was all new. Venezuela is going through its own madness at the moment through economic mismanagement. Now we've got the US sanctions on them. And so you've got people going to bed hungry in Venezuela, Colombia's neighbor. And so you've got these Venezuelans who are walking into Colombia in search of a better future. But sometimes they're walking into the midst of this kind of very low grade war that's being carried out in the shadows. And so this prostitute I interviewed turned up to this coca town. It was this kind of lawless, Wild West type of town where the narco militias control. And she was working as a prostitute. And she really stuck in my mind, because she was kind of, by the end of the interview, she kind of said that she was so cynical and so young. And it just, I thought, my God, what she has seen will outstrip anything or so much of I've seen, and I'm so much older than her, but just the intensity of this experience for her, being a prostitute with the narco militias, with the coca farmers, for someone so young, she's seen so much, and she starts to tell me about how she believes that these are the end times, that the apocalypse is coming, and it was just really heartbreaking.
It was
so
19, she was 19, wasn't she?
I think so,
Yeah.
And just the grimy life she lived, that impacted me on the sad side. But I also do want to highlight what impacted me is the generosity of Colombians in the face of the violence, and those Colombians who adopt the dead bodies, the dead souls. I don't know if you've got to that part yet or not.
I don't think I'm there yet, no.
Well, I don't want to ruin it, but really sum it up quickly, because I do want to, there is beauty in the sadness as well. Okay. And so there's this one town in Colombia. Basically what happened is the narco violence got so bad, and that what they were doing is they were trying to disappear the bodies. As these narco militias would fight each other, the drug cartels would fight each other, they would throw them into the river. And people would see them floating by. But one town decided to start a tradition. They would send their firemen out and pick up everybody. Other towns just let them float by. It's not our responsibility. This town, Puerto Berrio, would take them out. So at first they start burying them in the John Doe's corner of the graveyard. You'll never have a chance. There's so much killing. You never have a chance of identifying them. The backlog is just tremendous. So you just bury them, John Doe, Jane Doe. What the local people start doing organically is something beautiful. They start coming in every Monday and they take a grave. They start cleaning it and they adopt a soul, and they start praying to that soul, whispering, and they say, look, I'm gonna tend to your grave. You don't have any family. You're alone out there. I'm gonna look after your grave as if you were my own family, but please help me out. So the people would come in, they would say, I'm having trouble with my girlfriend. Help me out. And so you start seeing,
oh, that's lovely.
And you start seeing all of these little plaques on the graves, and it says, thank you for, in my time of need, you came through for me.
Oh, that melts my heart.
Exactly, it's so beautiful. And it wasn't like an organized plan. It wasn't someone giving orders. It was just naturally the natural warmth of Colombians. But it's also the kind of the spiritualism of them, the kind of the weirdness, but it's just a divine madness kind of like, I would say.
Yeah, no, that's really lovely. I definitely would remember if I'd been at that party yet. So no, that's lovely. I look forward to that as well. So on to the next. Obviously, there, as you mentioned, there's a lot of heartbreaking stories and things like that, definitely as well. But then on the other side of that, you've spoke to people who are obviously really, really high up in the cartels and things like that as well. I'd quite like to know. I mean, obviously, to get interviews with people like that would be a challenge in itself. So it would be good if you could, obviously being a resident there for a long time and things like that, I understand you would have built up relationships. But I mean, what motivations do you think the hires up in the cartel had for doing an interview with you, and how challenging was it to get them on side and things like that?
So there's kind of two parts to that. Just one thing, when you go to the farmers where they actually produce the cocaine, they're actually very open to people coming in because they want to show the world. They're saying, look, we're not criminals. Look at how we live. We want you to understand why we do this. And they show you how impossible their lives are. And when we move on to the cartels, you're right, that's completely different. It's not in their interest to talk. Essentially, my contacts in that world started out just pure serendipity. It was some years ago, I was at a fashion event, and I was going in through the entrance for the media, and there was that woman with the clipboard. And for some reason, throughout my life, those people have just annoyed me. Those people who just say, oh, I'm looking, no, you can't come in. And there was a guy with two women, and he was trying to get in, and she was saying, no, get out of here, you can't come in. And then I was like, what, and I told her, what's the problem? And she said, and I said, they're working with me. Just to, that kind of thing where you just see something going on, you're like, they're with me. And so we went in, and then this man turned to me and said, all right, I owe you a favor. It turned out he was crucial in the social scene of the underworld. He was in all of the parties where these drug traffickers will hang out. and partying is a central part of their life. It's where they get to show off, where they get to go partying with the actresses, with the models. It's not just it's a central part of why they want to become drug traffickers. They want to show off. It's where they can let loose, where they can hang out. And this guy was always there, and he would present his friends, who were these models and actresses, to the drug traffickers. So I got to know him, and through him, I would meet a lot of other people at these parties. And so over years, I did various stories, meeting these different people. I would interview some drug traffickers there. I would be, and you go gaining trust throughout that world. So that means I get access to interview a drug trafficker. I call him Alex in the book, Kilo. But yeah, it took years. It took years to get to a drug trafficker who would, and even when I got to a drug trafficker, it's extremely difficult to interview these people. You can't ask about specific crimes. You can't say, oh, when's the next load of cocaine going on?
Yeah.
You can't do that. So you talk in generalities. It was never something specific, because you can't record them, obviously. So, it was me kind of, and to be honest, I wasn't writing it down at the moment a lot anyway, because, these are men and women who don't like people taking notes in front of them. I mean, he sits down for an interview. He's not sitting down for an interrogation. He's not going to agree because of this interview to go to prison. Oh, well, stupid me. No, he's not thinking that. So, it's a very delicate dance to do those interviews.
And do you think that's maybe why they done it? Was it for the show-offiness of it, if you like they wanted to?
No, and that's also a reflection of how the drug traffickers have changed. 30 years ago in Colombia, especially, when you're talking about the age of Pablo Escobar, these men would get their face on the front cover of the newspaper, and they didn't care. I mean, they probably preferred not to, but once it was there, they didn't care. These were larger than life drug traffickers, and they ruled through power. They wanted people to know how powerful they are. The new generation of drug traffickers like to call themselves the invisibles. These are men, and almost entirely they are men, but these are men who operate in the shadows. They opt for a much lower profile. If I had to guess why Alex gave me these interviews, it's because I think he wanted some sort of, they're very smart, and they're always seeking how to use everything around them. And I think, my suspicion is, well, there's two things. I think he saw me possibly, if things really went badly, that he could use me as a channel to get to authorities, because they're always looking for that parachute, that second parachute. But secondly, I think he genuinely enjoyed sitting down and talking with someone and kind of trying to understand, how did he get to this point in life? Because, when you're in the underworld, the conversation ain't sometimes the most enlightening. I mean, if you're hanging around with a contract killer who drops out of school at 12, you're not discussing the Mona Lisa. You're not discussing the ramifications of, I mean, these are men and women who talk about, last night's soap opera, what the handbag, their girlfriend just bought. So I think Alex was a very, very intelligent man. He also, for obvious reasons, I can't go into too much about this, but he didn't come from those slums.
Okay.
Yeah. So, he was eloquent. We would think about things. And I think he enjoyed those conversations.
Okay, no, that's brilliant. And did you feel intimidated at any point, or were you very comfortable with him? Was he like your friend at this point, or?
All the time. I mean, because these men and women live in a world of dread. It's just constant. The world of cocaine, after hanging out with these people for so long and doing so many stories with them and going to their parties, what I realized is that the world of cocaine you can describe, imagine, just put yourself in this. You're in the middle of a casino. Everybody around you is winning. There's that electricity in the air of everybody, cash in their hand. Everybody's jumping for joy. Couples are going off, having as much sex. You see them going off. There's sex everywhere. There's cash everywhere. Everyone's money. That's that kind of a frenzy in the air. But at the same time, anybody could step up to you and put a bullet in the back of your head. That's what the world of cocaine constantly feels like. It's sex, money, but murder at any moment. So everybody's gone kind of half mad in that world because, you know, the stress and the strain of this weird life and death that they all live, that death could just come out of nowhere. And it frequently does. The last thing you'll ever hear, a good chance, if you're a drug trafficker, the last thing you will ever hear is the screeching brakes of a motorcycle as your assassins have arrived to the scene of the crime to kill you. That's how they live. So being around them is, you know, you never get, when I finished the research and I kind of flew out and I finished the book and I was like, I'm done with it. I felt like a tremendous weight, just my own safety was taken off my neck. Murder for these men and women is at the drop of a hat. They're always killing each other. And so, you know, I walked into that world, and that's another thing about cocaine, just to sum this point up. Everything in cocaine, she lays it out for you. It's like a deal with the devil. She says that this could all be yours if you step through that door. And everybody steps through that door and they all live long enough to regret it. Every person I met. And so I stepped through that door to interview these people. There were days when I regretted it. I was like, why didn't I write a book about penguins or something? You know? Hanging out and like penguins aren't going to like, there's no penguins on the back of motorbikes with Uzis. No, it's just, you know, me and penguins. But yeah, it's a heavy scene.
No, it definitely sounds it. And you personally sort of like discounting the interviews and things like that, just sort of everyday life and things like that. Was there anything particularly unsettling that you witnessed firsthand or things like that?
I mean, again, I was staying away from the actual day-to-day things. I just ethically, I can't be present. I mean, well, yeah, you kind of have to stay away from people committing crimes in front.
Yeah.
I can't have people know. I can't know about an upcoming crime. Okay. I mean, I think just ethically. I mean, if we're talking about people dealing drugs, that's one thing. You know, that was happening in front of me. But I can't know about someone sending 4 tons of cocaine on a submarine to America. I think that puts me in tricky. And certainly not. I can't know about someone who's going to be murdered. So I was staying away from that kind of thing, and they weren't keen to show that kind of thing again. Again, there was trust in me, but there wasn't that much. Okay. You know, so yeah, it's. I mean, this time it's kind of, it's a dread that anything could happen at any moment. But yeah, it's just no, there was no one was killed in front of me in the course of writing this book.
Okay, good. And another thing that you touch on in the book quite a lot that's quite interesting is sort of religion and how much that means to them, and you know the prayers on behalf of the acts that they're doing and things like that. One thing I was quite curious to know is your thoughts on that. I mean, do you believe they have a genuine belief there, or has it sort of molded into some sort of superstition thing, like, you know, like knocking on wood and things like that? Or deep down, are these people genuinely religious? And what's your thoughts on that?
Oh, they would see no distinction.
Okay.
It's absolutely all melded together, the superstition, because this is, remember, I mean, it's from the beginning, it was this kind of the imposition of the Catholic Church on the indigenous of the Americas. Mm-hmm. And they themselves immediately becomes this own version of Catholicism. It's there's a lot of kind of superstition melded in this. So by the time now in the 21st century, you've got in Colombia, just take Colombia for example, you've got this kind of weird mixture of Catholicism. Protestantism is hugely growing, the evangelicals. Then you've got the spiritual beliefs, the religions that the African slaves were brought over with them. Then you've got the old indigenous kind of rituals and beliefs. So you've got all of this kind of melded into each other. So it all becomes this kind of very strange world of different beliefs. Colombians are very, very superstitious at the highest level. I mean, they're very, very superstitious. In ways that I think would be I mean, for instance, that you would have, I mean, I just remember, yeah, it's everybody's very superstitious, I noticed there. And so that these people, these drug lords or these contract killers were equally superstitious. So I interview a witch who performs spells for the drug trafficker. And he does these spells, like one of them is to make the shipment of cocaine go invisible. What he means by all invisible, but it means that the customs agencies and the police won't look at it as much. It kind of just doesn't draw attention to itself.
Okay.
This witch told me that there were other spells that he sometimes casts, which is to, it can kill people. You know, he can, there's another spell he casts, asks to cast the spell, which is to make a man fall in love with a woman. She will go to the witch and say, hey, look, here's some money. I need this man to fall in love with me. So, you know, they believe in this very, very strongly.
That's crazy. So the witch part, I've not got to that either yet. Now I'm looking forward to that as well. And another thing I was quite interested in knowing is, did you feel at all that the religious aspect of it was used to perhaps draw people into it more, or recruit people? Is that a way that they found new members and things, or no?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just they all grow up with these rituals. So another ritual that I document in the book is of how the contract killers, which are called sicarios, the sicarios have their own virgin, the Virgin of the Assassins. And this is a statue, and you can just go there. And it's not only for the assassins, because you see normal people go there as well, but it is well known. It's this kind of little shrine by the side of a big road in Medellin. People say that it was founded and paid for by Pablo Escobar when he was alive. And that's where they go. And they go to kind of pray for their bullets. They go to pray for success in these operations. And when I asked this sicario, I said, how can you combine these two things, that you believe in God, you believe in a kind of Catholic version of God, which is obviously implies heaven and hell, but you're also killing someone for money? And he said to me, this kind of, again, these men and women are constantly looking to absolve themselves of any responsibility for what they're doing. He said to me, well, if I go out killing and God lets me kill this person, that means God wanted that person to die. That means that that person had sinned against someone and I was just catching up with them. If God doesn't want that person to die, if that person's truly innocent, well, then God will stop me from carrying out my work. But again, you see how he's washed his hands.
Pushing ownership on something else and put it out of their hands. It wasn't me, it was God.
Exactly. So it's not his fault now, it's God's fault. It's like, all right, you know, yeah. I mean, but again, everyone's half crazy in that world at this point. You know, I mean, that's just the truth of it. And that was what I wanted to bring out in this book, that this is a world, this underworld throbs with passions, and it's not logical. In recent years, there's been this kind of way of approaching and looking at cartels and say, oh, well, it's just like a corporation. And that comparison is interesting, and it can be useful up to a point. Mm-hmm. But the passions that pulsate throughout the cocaine world are, again, it's lust, it's greed, it's treachery, it's envy, it's murder.
No, it definitely sounds it. And one thing, again, that you mention a lot throughout the book is there seems to be, with some of the people that you interview, quite a lack of hope for any improvement on that, and things being different. It sounds like, you know, that's not something that they can vision. So from you as an outsider's perspective, reporting in there, how hopeful do you feel personally that things will improve, and things could be different for them?
I mean, not much. This is one of the countries in the world with the greatest concentration of power, greatest concentration of wealth. I mean, Colombia is shockingly unequal. It's stunning how unequal that country is. You're talking about this groups of families who have been running things just for generations. And it's just, because Colombia is this impossible terrain. It's just made up of these mountains that would just take you days to traverse. And that's the entire country, is made up of these thick, beautiful jungles, these treacherous Andean mountain ranges. It's an incredibly complex terrain. So that means that Bogota, the capital, has never been able to exert control over all of the country. There's always one more jungle. It can't. So what that means is you constantly have a weak central government. So power is always accumulated by these families in different areas. If you sit down in any regional capital of that country, sit down with the smart, a teacher of like, a secondary school teacher who's having a beer, sit down with them and just chat. Within 15 minutes, you can ask, hey, who are the families that run everything there? They'll list them off. They'll say, oh, it's that family, it's that family, it's that family. And these families just interchange power, or they rule collectively. So they constantly keep the power and the wealth amongst themselves, and the rest of the country just has to hard scrabble. I thought we were all so optimistic when there was this historic peace deal that was signed in 2016 between the largest Marxist-Leninist guerrilla group, the FARC, and the Colombian government. And, this was supposed to be the new Colombia, that they could put aside the civil war. It wasn't going to solve all of the problems. It wasn't. It's still a developing country. It has a lot of problems, but at least they would take that violence, put it to one side, put it behind them, and then kind of push forward. Unfortunately, the government just didn't do what the government needed to do. And so now we see more cocaine than ever before and a new round of violence.
So why was it that it fell through? What in particular went wrong with it?
So by the time of 2016, by the time that these two sides signed this agreement, the FARC were controlling much of the coca, which is a green bush that provides the raw material that turns into cocaine, these leaves from the coca bush. The FARC were controlling a lot of the territory across Colombia where the coca was grown. Implicit in this deal was the FARC saying, we will lay down our weapons, we will destroy our weapons, but you, the central government, have to do what you've never done in the history of Colombia. Reach every corner of this country and provide a minimum of law and order. And if you can, well, it was part of the peace deal also, some education, some schooling, and some basic healthcare for these farmers who live out in these forgotten corners. Mm-hmm. And the government just simply didn't get there in time. But all of the other illegal cartels looked at all of this territory that was filled with coca, and it was like a starting pistol. Mm-hmm. The farmer laying down their weapons, who's going to be the first to take over? It should have been the government. It wasn't. And so I'm getting there. I'm doing the research on where the cocaine is made. I travel to a place called Catatumbo, which in the old indigenous language means the land of lightning, because there's more lightning strikes there than any other place on the planet. It's up in the border with Venezuela. It's northeast Colombia, jungles and mountains. And there you have, just to show how complicated you have the EPL, which is a drug trafficking narco militia. That stands for the Popular Liberation Army. You have the ELN, which is a Marxist-Leninist organization, which stands for the National Liberation Army. You have dissidents of the FARC, and then you have other narco militias, and you've got all of these different militias fighting each other for control of the cocaine industry. And so that's why the government it failed again.
Interesting that there. And have there been any sort of good efforts involved from the government recently to try and get things back, or is it just a case of, oh well, the cartels have it, we'll just leave it now? Or
I mean, no, it's not. I mean, just to be clear, it's not the kind of government stated policy to let the cartels have it. I mean, that's not. It's just, it was by omission. It wasn't kind of on purpose. The government would say it's trying its best to take on these territories. And look, some parts of the country have certainly seen a reduction in violence. But the hardest hit parts during the Civil War are still suffering. And it was heartbreaking because I was traveling through those parts of the country in 2016, and I saw the optimism. There was one town called Ituango, and again, up in the mountains. And I was driving with this driver. It was at night, and he was just talking to his friend. It was a truck. I was in the back seat. He was talking to his friend, and he says, "Hey, man, it's been a while since I've seen a dead body along this street." And he starts talking to the friend, and they start saying it. They say, "Yeah, do you remember like 2-3 years ago, there was a body every week. You couldn't touch him because then you would be implicit. So you just had to leave the body." And they tell a story about a man who drives past the body, gets to the town and realizes the body was actually his son, but he couldn't stop and he didn't know. Oh. And so they're talking to each other, and they say, and he looks at him and he says, "Yeah, things have changed, haven't they?" And that was the moment that the peace process just got into my heart. I was like, my God, these people are seeing a new life. They're getting ready for a new life to build and not be constantly worried about violence. And so when it kind of started to slowly collapse, it was just heartbreaking to watch. again, there are some parts of the country, I would say, in the southeast of the country, in places in and around a place called Guaviare, I think is probably better than it once was. Mm-hmm. And there are other parts where maybe, but parts where I've spent years reporting, another part is the mountains of northern Cauca. I mean, that's suffering. And at this point, there's so many millions and hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to be fought over in the cocaine industry. You know, this is the inspiration why they all keep fighting.
That's really, really sad. And what steps do you think personally the government could take to improve things? I mean, besides sort of the standard, at least law and order and things like that. I mean, what's your thoughts on the solution here?
Well, there's two things I want to say. One is what Colombia can do, then there's what the world can do. The first is what Colombia could do, again, with the help of the world. Look, Colombia is a developing country. It's not right that we across the world say, hey, you, take care of the drug problem. The drug problem exists because people in the wealthier countries consume the drug. Yeah. I know, I'm sure we'll get to that later, but so that means we can help out with building up the infrastructure. These farmers in Colombia need bridges, they need roads. I'll give you an example. I was in a settlement. It took us 6 hours to get from this settlement to the closest town, and town is like 15,000 people. When I looked, and that was like 3 hours along a highway, then on a dirt track that only a huge truck, bus, or motorbike could go down, then crossing on a makeshift ferry, then an hour on the back of a motorbike. When I looked at Google Maps, it told me we had traveled 30 kilometers. Now imagine taking 1 ton of pineapples. How are you going to take a ton of pineapples on a motorbike? It's not working. So how are these farmers supposed to get stuff to market? You know what's easy to take? Cocaine. So when we build infrastructure, bridges, roads, and connect these farmers so they can get to market, you'll see miracles take place. Now we come on to what the rest of the world can do. Just as Colombia has failed to really be able to control its coca, the rest of the world has done nothing to cut its demand for the drug. This exists because people consume the drug. What is the UK doing? I haven't seen anything. What is the US doing? Nothing. And I think Colombia can quite rightly stand up and say, hey, you criticize us for not taking care of cocaine production. We can criticize you for not taking care of consumption. I don't see the program that is effectively curtailing cocaine consumption. Mm-hmm. We haven't got a grip on this in our own countries. We don't know why people in our countries are consuming this drug.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, I mean, why is it that you feel that there is such a demand for it? You talk about the glamour of it and things like that. I mean, how has it come? I mean, in the past few years, like rates have soared and things like that. What do you pin that to?
I think these things are cyclical. I think it's, look, there's so much cocaine out there, it's going to be consumed. And we've kind of gone through this whole opioid epidemic, especially here. There was a huge thing with heroin. I think you see these kind of circles of the drugs. Cocaine is obviously an upper. Cocaine is also very tied with economic booms. The more I thought about cocaine, the weirder I thought it was. No one pays for advertising for cocaine. Obviously not. Mm-hmm. But still, collectively, we all think of it in ourselves as the drug of glamour. We do. I mean, whatever you may think, however you much oppose it, it's still always associated. Any legal brand name would kill for that kind of recognition, but it follows the economic boom. So in London in the 1980s with the stock market, what was the drug? Cocaine. In the 1990s in Russia, when oligarchs are becoming multi-billionaires, what's the drug? Cocaine. Asia is now all of these newly minted millionaires across that whole region. What's the drug that the Colombian traffickers want them to start consuming and are sending ever more kilos over? Cocaine. It's tied in. So I think we've had this economic boom in recent years. Certainly kind of the economy's been growing. So I think that could be one reason. It's how to curtail it. I don't know. I don't have that answer, but I know the governments don't either. Every time they come out with these programs, it's just that face palm. It's, oh my God, no, don't do that. No, the programs are so bad. It's like you're too young to remember this, but Nancy Reagan, the wife of Ronald Reagan, would come out and say, just say no, kids. Like, if you're 16, surely the uncoolest thing is listening to the wife of the president. It's like, I'm listening to the wife of the president. Well, just nerd alert, man. I mean, no, we need to figure out a way to really get into the mentality of these 16-year-olds. So it's not the headmaster wagging his finger or her finger at the kids, because that's going to say, oh, okay, actually, this headmaster's making it sound kind of cool. Mm-hmm. We have not got to grips with this at all. And I think, look, people are free to do what they like with their lives, what they want. You know, I mean, I genuinely believe that. But I do think when in places like the UK, when we have some of the highest rates of drug use in the region, in Europe, that's not a healthy sign. You know, again, I know people who consume marijuana every day and it does them no harm. I wouldn't do it, but go for it. It's your life. You know, I don't mind. But if as a society, we're kind of, at that point, it strikes me that we're numbing something. We're trying to numb the pain of something. If we're consistently number one, that's not healthy. That's not, yeah, I don't know. So I think we, in our own societies, need a level of introspection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what
let me throw it back to you. What do you think? How should the UK go about trying to cut drug use? Because I really don't know. I don't have the answer. What do you think?
I don't know it either. Like, I really don't. I think overall, I think dependency stems from something that's been missing. I know a lot of it can be pinned down to like trauma and things like that, but I think deep down it's a connection that's missing to the world and things like that. And I think there's a lot of people that feel a bit isolated and things like that, and want to be taken away from their current lives. And I think that's definitely where like dependency and things like that stems from. But like recreationally, I'm not too sure how you curb that or go about that and things. So it's definitely it's a really complex issue and things like that. What's your thoughts on legalization, and what do you think?
So legalization is obviously one possible solution to this, and probably philosophically, again, as I kind of hinted, that I'm probably in favor with that. I think it's always struck me as kind of stupid that Boris Johnson would decide what you can or can't not put into your own body. Look, you know yourself. And as I say, I wouldn't smoke weed every day, but it seems to work for other people. So, I mean, go for it. So I'm broadly sympathetic to it. But I think there is, so I'm broadly sympathetic to it. But when you look at legalization, I would say this one thing. Let's look at the recent moves to decriminalize marijuana. That was a 30 or 40-year project of men and women working hard at that every single day. It starts off with grassroots organizations. It finds a celebrity who will endorse you, who will give that interview, who will say, you know what, yeah, I occasionally consume marijuana. Back in the 70s, it's brave men and women going out there, not afraid to say, hey, look, we know you're going to call me a hippie, but I support decriminalization of marijuana. It was all about the whole medical marijuana, which was never really true, you know, but it was, I don't blame them. They were fighting against which I consider a stupid law. So go for it. You know, all tools, but look at how long that took them. It was, as I say, 30, 40 years. I don't see the people in favor of legalizing drugs even beginning that campaign. Because most people, when you say, and again, this is always the test, speak to your uncle or your aunt and just say, hey, uncle, auntie, I think heroin ought to be sold on the street corner. Look at their facial reaction. They'll be like, you know, they can't believe it. They'll think you're mad. And that's what normal people who don't really think about this issue too much, that's their reaction, because no one's been doing the political work of explaining to them. So that's a decades-long project if we're looking at legalization. My concern is, what do we do about the Colombians who are dying before we get around to legalizing it? And again, this has to come from us. This is all on us, because Colombia, as a developing country, not a particularly powerful country in the international community, cannot do this alone. It would be impossible, and it would be immoral to force Colombia to do that alone. It needs to be working with Colombia. It needs strong international partners to come up with a new plan. But increasingly, people are throwing up their hands and saying it probably has to be legalization because they don't have any other answer. The former president of Colombia, Juan Manuel Santos, who signed that peace deal, who was actually renowned in his time for being one of the kind of firmer hands against the rebels, against the cocaine industry. He said when he was a president, he said fighting the war on drugs can feel like you go into an exercise bike in a gym. You get on, you pedal and pedal, you sweat for half an hour, you get off, you haven't moved 1 inch. And he said that's what the drug war feels like, and it's true. And he said he would be open to the suggestion of talking about possibly legalization in the context of working with everybody else. The rest of the world was silent. Shamefully, I say, because he took a risk by saying that. Mm-hmm. It was brave of him to do that, and the rest of the world just...
It's a shame. And one other thing I thought would be quite interesting, what's your thoughts on how the coronavirus is going to impact the cocaine market and things? I mean, do you foresee that having a knock-on effect in Colombia? Could it be a positive one? I mean, what's your thought?
It will be temporary. I think it is having an effect on cocaine because cocaine relies on the grooves of civilization. It relies on the rest of normal commerce occurring so it can hide itself. So Colombia is actually going through quite a stringent lockdown. They're really monitoring who's on the streets. Entire provinces have just stopped people coming in and out. So when you have a situation like that, it's a lot harder for cocaine to move around. Mm-hmm. Take one of the most important cocaine corridor on the planet, which is the Eastern Pacific. So imagine, look on a map, you're looking at the west coast of South America, which is Ecuador, Colombia, Ecuador. And these boats that leave those countries and go up towards the United States, the underbelly of Central America. That is the biggest, most important cocaine corridor on the planet. Now, these boats they normally try to mingle amongst fishing boats. Well, if no one's out there fishing, they're more able to be detected. But again, it's always the same problem. It's the laws of economics. So now that there's a scarcity of cocaine in Europe, I'm hearing that in France, I think it was, the price for the drug has shot up.
Okay.
So that's always the knock-on effect. So any victory we ever have in the war on drugs, if we destroyed half of the output in cocaine this year, well, that just drives the price up. So that makes it even more tempting for people to get into the business. Mm-hmm. I don't see how we break that knot. I don't see how we untie that. Mm-hmm. And that's why I guess people... so anyway, look, I think the COVID-19 is having an impact, but I think it will be temporary. As soon as the world opens up again...
It's just going to start again and...
Cocaine will be back.
Yeah. Another thing I thought would be quite interesting is obviously on Netflix there's a lot of TV shows, like there's Narcos, things like that, the film Blow with like Johnny Depp and things like that. What impact do you think films like that and TV shows like that are having on the whole trade?
It's a good question. I I don't think something like Narcos is having an impact in Colombia. Mm-hmm. Narcos is very good, by the way. People ask me how realistic is it? How closely does it adhere to the real history? It's extremely realistic. When you're talking about what these drug lords were doing, it's very, very realistic. You don't need to exaggerate that world. It's filled with these crazy men and women doing extreme things. It's made for these kind of series. So I think it's excellently done. It was interesting because when I first arrived to Colombia, none of popular culture would touch the drug war, would even really talk about the cartels. I think that was because it was still the time of the old drug lords. At that moment, the biggest drug lords were Scratchy, Don Diego, and Soap. These were very tremendously dangerous men. And they were still out and free. So popular culture, like the soap operas, never touched it. But then something changed in about 2008. And they started doing these soap operas about the cocaine cartels themselves. And there was this constant discussion about whether it was glamorizing or not. And I guess it's the same thing we see with, it was the same discussion that I would hear about rap in the United States. Is it glamorizing or is it reflecting the reality? People can have different views on this. And that was the same thing that came up with these series. And the creators, I interviewed one of the creators of this series. It was called The Cartel of the Snitches, which is based on the Northern Valley Cocaine Cartel. And she said, look, we're just trying to show people the reality. And it's true, they were showing it. I think that's, the critics of those series certainly said it's glamorizing this life. It's kind of tempting these young men and women to get into that world. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe, but the young men and women were getting into that world before it anyway.
Yeah, and it does, it does sound like it's a deep-rooted issue, not something that on surface level, like, I don't know. My opinion of it, I don't know.
I agree, yeah. I think you're right on that. Yeah.
I think it's like drug use is a symptom of a much deeper issue, and seeing it on the telly and things like that if you're needing to fill that void somehow, what's the television going to do about it? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So, yes. So
I think it's an easy thing for someone to blame, and it's a way of, you're right, because it's an easy way for a politician especially to point their hand instead of doing the real work, which could go in and provide some sort of path out for these people. So I'll just blame the TV show. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. A way to shift ownership again and discount blame and not look at their own failures and things like that. So yeah, no, brilliant. So my last question for you, bit of an odd one. I was just wondering, the monkey at the start of the book that you buy, do you revisit that at some point?
She's not a monkey, Manuela. She's a kinkajou.
That was the word. I tried to remember the word before coming on and then I forgot. But yes. So.
Little Manuela, the amount of people who have asked me, I think Little Manuela is the star of that book. I had such a fun time with Manuela. No, I never got a chance. After I gave her to that store, I gave that and I went back out because it's one way to get to the Coca settlement where I was staying. Mm-hmm. So I had to come back and she seemed very happy there. It's hard to get to, and the security situation there has deteriorated even more since I was there. So now there's bombings along the highway a lot more frequently. They're kidnapping a lot more people. They're carrying out massacres a lot more in that region. So it would be hard, and that's so isolated and it's under such narco militia control. It would be hard for me to go there now. But I know that she's in good hands because that family, when you just meet a family and they just love animals. That family who just give off good vibes?
Yeah.
They all love each other. They're all helping each other. The little kids helping out the mother. The father's helping out the daughter. They were a great family. And there was like all the dogs running around. There were like parrots. There were cats. There were just, there's all kind of jungle animals out there. Yeah, and they were just a great family.
Oh, that's really nice. Now, is there anything that I've not asked that you'd like to discuss or you'd like to say?
No. I think there's one thing that I do think is kind of, I think there's something I didn't really touch upon, but I think is just to leave us thinking, I think there's a lot of hypocrisy about drug use. I do think it's not a new point, but just, to hear these stories about these ministers who were consuming cocaine and at the same time they were overseeing possibly that other people would get fired for the same drug use. I think we need an adult conversation about drugs, and we're very far away from that. And I think on all sides, because the truth is, I think if we look at it, the truth is that the vast majority of people who take certainly something like cocaine do not have a problem. That's not to advocate using it, but I do think we need to start speaking like adults about this, because otherwise people who are in that world are just never going to listen to anybody. If we come out and say, oh my God, I mean, everyone remembers that in the 80s, well, if you're my age, we remember being told that one hit of crack and you're addicted. So anyone who is in that world and they're hearing the media talk like that, they're like, I don't have to listen to these people. Mm-hmm. I do think there is a minority of people who really do need help. And I think, so we need to kind of be open about this. The majority of people who consume most drugs, although again, my speciality here is definitely cocaine, just use it casually and don't seem to have a problem. Mm-hmm. I think there is that minority that do have a serious problem with either addiction or health problems. Cocaine kills people the first time. It can set off a tremendous heart attack. Certainly in America, that traumatized a generation of people. There was this whole promising basketball star who was in college and snorted cocaine like at a party, just dropped dead of a heart attack. But I do think, and I think the media's job is complicated by this because there's so much consumption of cocaine in the media. So I think they find themselves in this kind of thing of parroting what the government's saying, but not being honest. And that was one of the things I wanted to do with this book. Let's start talking honestly about all of this. Mm-hmm. That would be my hope. And also that, again, that we help Colombia find a new path, because it's a beautiful country filled with phenomenal people. If you ever get a chance to go to Colombia, take it. And I really do want to be clear about this. My book talks about the forgotten corners of Colombia. If you travel to Colombia, if you take a wrong turn, you will not end up in the middle of a drug cartel party.
Okay.
You will not end up in the middle of a coca field, I promise. You have to struggle to get to those things now. It's tough. So the majority of that country is the best coffee you'll ever drink in your life, the most beautiful Caribbean beaches, adventure tourism into the heart of the Amazon. That country's got it all.
Mm-hmm. No, that's brilliant. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, no, you're very welcome. It's been brilliant. I'll let you know when it's uploaded and everything like that, and I'll send you it by email so you can have a little look at it. But thank you so much. It was lovely to meet you.
All right. Take care, Sammi.
Bye.